Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Runcam Hybrid 2. This camera has two lenses, one for your HD recording, which records right here to the SD card, and one for your FPV view. Single board 20 by 20 millimeter stacked mounting. Simple connection, just like as if this whole assembly was a camera. It uses QR codes in order to change the settings of the camera. It weighs 18.6 grams. Pretty standard, 19 millimeters wide for your mounting. It does have two holes on each side for vertical adjustment. 25 millimeters tall. From the back to the lens is 22 millimeters. From the back to the top camera is 25 millimeters. Distance between the two mounting holes looks to be 6 millimeters. Capable of recording at 4K 30 frames per second, 2K at 60 frames per second, and 1080p at 120 frames per second. First thing we're going to do is we're going to test the FPV camera for its light handling. Do my standard light handling cloth test by putting it right against the lens and pulling it away. Putting it about 1.5 feet and then extending my arm about as far as I can, which is about 3 feet, while still maintaining the quad in front of myself. Various adjustments in the cloth distance as we close out the light handling. I can also show you this in HD. Let's take a look at that. Not that this is important because you're not looking at it, but you might want to know how it changes light. You can see that the HD camera is much slower to change, especially when the cloth is right against the lens, which is kind of unnatural. But it's one of the things I've been doing for so long, kind of continue to do it because I think people expect to see it, and maybe, just maybe, there's something that you can draw from it. I don't. I just think it's unreasonable. Gonna take off and go for a fly. Typical stuff. This is what you see. This is not what you see in the goggles. What you see in the goggles, we'll get to there in a minute. This is the HD recording, and this is the primary reason I think you would buy one of these cameras, is that you are still running analog, like many people. I think the analog market might be unrepresented. I think the people who are super active might be moving to digital, but I think there's probably a majority of actually people who are still flying analog, at least in part. That's just my opinion. I could be well wrong, but that's what I suspect from talking to people in comments and just kind of my own thoughts about the silent majority. Because if I look at my videos, there might be 3,000 views, but there might only be 100 and some comments, or there might be 7,000 views and there might only be 200 comments. So there's a lot of people out there involved in this hobby and probably having a good time, but they're not making either they don't have an opinion or they don't feel like voicing their opinion, but they're not heard in some way, shape, or form, at least on my channel. If you go to Facebook groups and you go to RC groups, you go to places where people are more entrenched and more active, they definitely will be voicing their opinions, but we don't have any measurement for people who are reading that stuff that don't voice their opinion. So something to think about. We fly through the shadows. We do all the things that I tend to do. We're going to go look at the red truck here in a moment. As we get up there, you get a kind of a quick view of the truck. Unfortunately, this time of year is not a beautiful time of the year in my neck of the woods. It is kind of just settling into winter. It's actually getting very close to Christmas time, and we don't have any leaves. We still oddly have some greenery though, but no leaves on the trees. Go up top. This is something that I did recently on another camera review, one that I had to pull down. No big deal there. It's just that the camera wasn't available. So this one is available. You can go purchase this camera. There is some interesting bits about this camera, and one is it uses a QR code to change camera settings as far as your HD camera goes. So you have an app on your phone. It's the Runcam app. You select your camera. You go in and you make your selection changes, and then you show it a QR code in a mode, so you press the button on the side of the board. It has a green light on it, and then you put the code in front of the camera, and while you're looking in the goggles, you'll see it take that code, and you'll see maybe you change the recording settings. And you'll see it goes from, say you're recording at 4K and you're going to drop down to 1080p, and then it'll say, oh, we're recording at 1080p now. And it'll tell you the frames per second. Or what have you, what change you made. It'll register in the goggle view what changes that you made. You can solder a pigtail onto the board, but I couldn't make mine work for some reason, which was really strange. I really haven't had a problem with that in the past. You can also wire this up to a flight controller, and if you want to update the firmware on it, if an updated firmware is available, you have to wire it to the flight controller because you will be updating via the SpeedyBee app that Runcam produces. There's also a plastic cover that you get. I didn't go through all the accessories. There's a plastic cover that you get in order to keep the SD card in. There's a support card. There's some set of mounting screws and nylon standoffs. And then there's a couple of silicone wire connectors that you use for connecting this to your board for general building purposes. So there's not a whole lot in the box, not a whole lot to talk about there. The main things I think people want to know is size and weight, and then image quality. If you're wondering about these recording settings, this is at 2.7K and it is at 60 frames per second. I will have a 4K sample down in the video description, and I'll be posting that in a separate video, doing that just to maintain the file integrity, not to go through the editing process of increasing the frames per second, because this video will be posted in 60 frames per second. This is what you see in the goggles. So this is your goggle view. You can see my propellers there, where I don't think previously we could, or if we could only see them at the very, very edges. Maybe the tips were coming through. And I've got a lot of flickering. I think I've got my rapid mode, or my rapid fire, on the wrong mode for this particular camera and or VTX. Get to flying so many different things, but we'll see some segments here where it becomes a little bit clearer, so you can grade out the FPV view. While we're waiting for that good image to show up as I get in front of myself, touts 145 degrees field of view, Sony sensor, and it says that the latency on it is 6 milliseconds. I'm not going to do any latency testing. The methods I've tried in the past really had a huge variable to them. I have heard that there is a way to calculate the latency using like an LED light and kind of having a flicker and recording that separately. And then showing what the camera shows, so you can measure through your recording the difference between what you see in the recording versus in the goggles to give you your latency. I haven't done that myself, just some information that I got from some commenters on the channel about how I might be able to test latency. I think if you're really worried about latency, this is less than it is on digital, at least the DJI digital system. So latency really shouldn't be that much of an issue. If it is an issue, you're probably an extremely successful racer or extremely competitive, and you're probably going to want to go with a camera that does not have the extra lens, the extra sensor, the extra weight, and a board with an SD card in it. You're probably just going to want a stock camera if you need latency that's absolutely the lowest. That's probably a good enough sample of our FPV view. We got to see that. Again, I will have a 4K recording at 30 frames per second posted down in the video description. You're free to watch that at your leisure. Okay, so this is the Runcam app. Of course, when you get this app, you can select any of the Runcam cameras that you might be needing to use. Of course, we are already on the hybrid camera, and then we click on, or we tap on, generate QR code. So we can change these settings within here. Say you want the ISO to go to 400. You want to lock it in, and then you tap the apply up here. Oh, it tells you all this stuff. Make sure you're doing this. Make sure you're doing that. We close that. So this is our QR code. So you need to have the board powered on, and you need to have it in standby mode. So it can't be recording. So you've got to stop your recording, and then you press the mode button here. You long press it, and then you get a green light. I believe, if I remember correctly, the green light is this LED right next to my thumb. You probably can't see that because of the darkness, but you get a little green LED. That tells you it's in QR code. You put this in front of the camera, you hold it for a second, try to be steady, and then bloop, it takes, and you've now changed your settings based upon this configuration for the camera. Pretty simple, pretty handy. So the price that I see listed on the Runcam website is $89.99. That looks like it might be a short-term price. They've got a line through another price, but the big red price, or it's probably the Runcam orange price, is $89.99. It does not come with a card, so you'll need to buy an SD card, and I'll show you the one that I've been using. I bought this online, of course. This is an HP branded. I can barely make out what it says down there, but you can see down there in the lower right hand corner we've got the I and then the 1 inside the U, and I think it has something in this C too. I'd have to look up the specs on the website I bought it from in order to be able to read that little C. I just don't have the eyesight for that, or I'd have to get out my magnifying glass. But this gives you an idea. The card works fine, and I've not only used that card in this camera for recording purposes, but I've used it in others for 4K recording as well. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in that comment section below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.